Well, hello and welcome to another session here, brought to you by CARP, the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, our Northern Ontario chapter, and of course across the country with thousands of members. Hugh Kruzel is our chair here in Sudbury. And Hugh, you're going to introduce our special guest today.
Yeah, I am. Our special guest is Marc Serre. Marc is our Member of Parliament. There he is waving at us. Belt, and of course an essential component of kind of a tag team, which consists of Paul Lefebvre and Marc Serre. They almost go everywhere together.
But Marc, I know that Marc, you have particular concern for seniors, and of course, you know our CARP people are basically older adults and seniors. And as I mentioned, we have literally thousands of members across the country, and they've made representation to Parliament on numerous occasions, and also work with the provincial legislatures across the country as well too. But what got you interested in seniors at the beginning?
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, John, and you, one, for putting this on and continuing to provide information to CARP members all across Greater Sudbury, Northern Ontario, and Canada. So since being elected, right away I met with the national organization. Obviously, I met with you right away as CARP chair here in the area. So for me, is obviously seniors is a big issue since I've been elected in 2015. So for me, meeting with CARP and understanding how the federal government could play a better role in seniors. And that's where, by meeting with CARP members, by meeting with the medical association, long-term care associations, home cares across the country, I developed a motion in the House of Commons in 2017. For the first time ever, the House of Commons pronounced itself to develop a national senior strategy. It's long overdue. We should have done this maybe a decade ago, having the federal government play more of a role. And since that motion has been accepted by the House of Commons, and the motion really focused, for me, what getting involved was helping seniors, especially seniors living in poverty. We have a large number of seniors that have no pension or very little CPP, and support by the federal government was really important. Housing was also part of this, and also something that I think we don't talk enough about. People that are older are discriminated against. There's ageism. That's clearly an issue that I've heard from CARP members and from people in general. They retire and they're pushed aside, which is really wrong. But that's our society that has to change and find ways to involve more of our seniors. Because CARP, I think, came out with a number nationally about $1 billion of volunteerism that seniors are doing in our organizations. So how can we as a federal government recognize more caregivers, support, benefits, tax credits? So that's part of that motion that got the federal government more involved. And now we have a seniors minister for the first time ever, full-time ministry dedicated to support municipalities, provinces, and organizations like yourself. So for me, it's something that in Nickel Belt and across the country, the aging population is, and we know from some of the issues we've had with COVID, that more attention needs to be provided, and we need to work better federally and provincially. So that's something that I'm proud of the work we've done, but we got a lot more work to do, though.
Well, Hugh has a particular interest, not only being chair of CARP, but also having seniors in your family. Hugh, your mother as well is someone that is experiencing challenges as well, and we all know in our own families. I know I had a mother-in-law in long-term care establishments, and this is something that, as you mentioned, Marc, it is an ageism thing, right, Hugh?
Yes. Yeah, but you know what? Marc's been very good about continuing a dialogue with us, and I think everybody listening understands that it has been an open door. It has been an incredible engagement with us, and I mean, let's face it, our current number, John, you would know, I think it's 26% of our population in Greater Sudbury is above the age of 65.
We have about,
Higher.
I think we got about 30,000 just within our catchment area here, which is quite significant.
And
And
some of us are just seniors in training too.
we're all going to make it if everybody wants to be a senior, because otherwise the alternative we don't want to consider.
It's not a good thing, no.
But it's interesting. We had a conference call in Ontario with all the CARP chairs yesterday, and there was some question is who had the most seniors, and I said that based on our population, our demographics, the Northern Ontario has a very high percentage of seniors because we lose young people going down south, and our seniors like to stay here really because it's a good place to live. We do have our challenges, but Mark, out in Nickel Belt, you have a very, I mean, you cover a large area in Nickel Belt. Perhaps
Huge.
for those people who are listening from across the country, you can explain just how large an area you do cover.
Well, the riding of Nickel Belt is the size of Belgium. So it's over, 32,000 kilometers, and it encompasses about 45% of the population of Greater Sudbury, and then all the outlining areas right to North Bay, to Gogama, Killarney, French River, West Nipissing. And a lot of that support for seniors, also when we look at seniors living in rural areas, is really important. Transportation, the isolation of seniors is really, and the low income, as I mentioned earlier. 17,000 people in Nickel Belt are currently receiving either the OIS or the
GIS, yeah.
guaranteed GIS, the guaranteed income supplement. And 70% of them are women. And that's the issue that we have to try and reach out more to ensure that we have that follow up with our seniors in rural areas and all around the region itself.
And talking about those areas that are outside the main metropolitan areas, there's real concern about broadband, about access. I mean, nowadays, especially with the COVID crisis, to be linked in is almost a necessity nowadays. But we also have some pretty high internet rates as well too, compared to, I think they're comparing to Australia, which is a very large country as well too. And apparently their internet rates are about half of ours, which is really concerning, and that's where the federal government can play a role, I believe.
Well, there's two areas. Obviously, the high price of internet. So how do we make it more affordable? And that by having more competition. So we're working on that, getting more spectrum, getting more companies so that we could lower the rate of internet. And then also the access. Obviously, in which large areas and low population, then the internet is less. But also, we got to remember, and since being elected, I remind the federal government, every department, that we cannot transfer everything on the internet. We have seniors that can't access it. So we still have to have toll-free numbers. We still have to have phone numbers. So it's a constant struggle. But I remind, even 2 years ago, Revenue Canada wanted every form to be sent by internet. And I said, whoa, I need copies here to give to seniors, So we have to have that balance. We have more and more seniors accessing the internet, but we still got to make sure the governments have access via telephone, which is a struggle, but we got to keep that going too.
Let's just talk about accessibility for a moment, if I may. It's so interesting because, of course, you're bilingual. Your office, naturally, all members of Parliament have services in English and French. There is, though, a evolution that's happening, especially here in Sudbury, and I'm sure that's happening it's happening in Southern Ontario quite distinctly. There are more people who are perhaps from other cultures and other linguistic groups who, I know Sudbury's become very diverse. How are we handling that? How does your interest, your availability to that group of seniors, how is that changing?
Well, definitely when we look at when we're getting more immigration, we're getting more newcomers, we're getting more individuals from all, and also you got to remember Sudbury was built on immigration.
It sure was.
After the Second World War. So this is not new to us. But what we need to be doing more, because there is discrimination. There is some individuals that still are uneasy with having immigration, at all ages. And also got to remember, even some of our francophone seniors speak very little English.
Mhm.
So there is a challenge there, that to have our services being acceptable just in French and English. So this is where, as a federal MP, working with organizations like yourself, working with the Greater Sudbury Advisory, Seniors Advisory, there's a group that are meeting every week that I've participated in, that with all the Alzheimer's Society, they're looking at some private home support, home care. Obviously, dealing with the long-term care facilities is a big priority of mine here in Nickel Belt. We really need to make sure that we take the time, because if we could communicate in someone's language, it's better for them and their health, and that isolation, and they rely less on the health.
Let's add one more layer to that. We do have a significant First Nations population as well. How is that? That's got to be put into the equation as well.
Well, we have First Nations on reserve here in Greater Sudbury, but we also have many individuals, seniors, elders that are living within the municipality. So you got on reserve, off reserve. So I work closely with the chiefs here locally, with councils, and federally, we've tried to put more investments. And COVID was a good example on how can we support our elders, and especially the First Nations communities. Going back to the issue of discrimination and racism, it exists here. It exists, and it's strong. I even see it with emails that I'm receiving in my office. We have to provide more education. People are people, and all lives matter. So we got to make sure that we have a bit more patience with our elders, but also we look at how can we value the work and the contribution that they're still making to our society. And that's where it's really frustrating, looking at what's happening in our long-term care facilities. And we're lucky here in Northern Ontario and Nickel Belt, when we look at St. Gabriel's, Elizabeth Center, and Ochateau and West Nipissing, the staff are amazing. They're working 24/7 to try and make sure that the COVID doesn't enter the long-term care, but we have to do more to support them. And I'm looking at some of the measures that we're taking here with private companies, looking at providing masks, gowns, because our long-term care facilities have been pushed aside. Provincially, they look at the hospital, that's more of it's easy to focus on, but there's so many other community organizations outside the hospital settings that we need to support better with equipment, PPE, and also provide, training to staff and supporting them. It's just amazing the work that they're doing, but we have to be careful, because as we reopen our economy, as you mentioned, our long-term care facilities are still very vulnerable to COVID.
That's true.
And so we got to be vigilant, and we got to support them better than what we're doing today.
Well, you know that Northern Ontario is a large, large area. I happened to be on one of your Zoom calls for your Northern Ontario caucus, I think it was last week. And of course, we're I guess blessed to have the Thunder Bay representative, who's a minister very much responsible for health. Maybe you can sort of explain what she's been doing and how you're working with her in this area.
Yeah, Minister Haidu has been fantastic to work with our public health officials. It's really important that we have that science and that working relationship with our public health officials. And what we're having in Greater Sudbury here with the health units is really crucial. So as a federal government, what we're trying to do is be supportive to all provinces, because as you know, each province has jurisdiction is responsible for health. So essentially we have different regulations by province. So our job federally is to try and make sure that we have enough PPE equipment when the provinces ask for it, that we have enough funding also, and we need more funding for our public health. Health is really local, and we need to make sure that we have more of that funding available. So Minister Haidu, as you probably saw, like on a daily basis, she's doing the press conferences and trying to inform Canadians on some of the health measures that we need to do with the distancing and washing your hands and relying. So, but again, the economy is reopening, so space by space, by area, but we still got to be cautious. We still got to be vigilant. 80% of all the deaths in Canada are linked to long-term care facilities. So
that's true, and I know that just on that same topic, in our meeting yesterday with the chapter chairs throughout Ontario, there's a real concern about opening up too soon, and the threat especially to seniors. And we know that when all this began, there was a real concern for those who were classified as older adults, 70 and over, that extra caution had to be for these particular individuals. We saw what happened in our seniors' homes, of course. But outside of the seniors' homes, we're wondering if there's enough emphasis now being placed, if people are taking a laissez-faire attitude towards towards the disease and the possibility, well, it's not going to affect me. But there seemed to be real concern with these chapter chairs that maybe the seniors are being left out of the equation now.
No, I thank you for raising that point, John. I mean, we just saw yesterday in the Hamilton area, about 42% of all the COVID cases are people from 20 to 29. So there is kind of a fatigue out there about, it's been months now that we've been isolated, and some people think, oh, well, the virus is not going to affect me, not going to affect us locally. And as businesses reopen, I'm getting complaints and calls here to my office. For example, we got grocery clerks, so we got retail workers they're getting pressure and very negative comments by people walking into the retail store and not washing their hands, not respecting the 6 feet distancing, and the staff have to kind of, excuse me, you got to respect it. And some are getting angry. And I'm saying these retail workers in the area, and there's some of our seniors too, have families, and we got to be cautious. So as we reopen the economy here, we still got to be cautious about the virus. The virus is still among us, and we need to do more testing, and that's where we're hoping to support better the province to make sure that we have quick and available testing so that we protect our seniors and protect our workers that are feeding us and are protecting us right now.
I think you're right. Well, one of our members, Dot Klein, one of our members, and Hugh, and I know Dot really well, is a registered nurse, and she's with the Ontario Health Coalition. And we had a conversation with her yesterday, and she was saying the same thing you were saying, Mark, about the fact that we just can't say this has gone away. And she's saying that even as vaccine is developed, we could be looking at even a couple of years of being very cautious. And it's so, but we're all human, and we all want to get back to the way things were before. And I guess what role, I know we hear the Prime Minister every day who's stressing caution, and of course his hair keeps getting longer and longer. I don't know if he's going to come to Sudbury. I don't know who's going to come to Sudbury now that we've opened up. There was some talk that people are coming up from Brampton to come, taking the 4-hour drive to get up here to get a haircut. Hugh doesn't have to worry about that, right, Hugh?
No, not at all. I was going to go and ask the question because naturally, Mark, you're not circulating. You're doing this. You're on the phone. You're on the internet. Parliament is not meeting. You're doing the right things as well, but you're still, the number of hours you're probably working has actually increased, hasn't it?
Well, definitely. I mean, when the pandemic first started, I was a kind of a travel agent, helping people from all over the world coming back home. So there was a lot of different concerns there. Even today, yes, my office is physically closed, but we answer all of our calls within 24 hours, all the emails coming in. And obviously, I've gone to buy groceries and part of the community. And everywhere I've gone, I've asked the staff how are things in that area. So from a work perspective, yes, Parliament has a virtual. I just participated today at noon via conferencing. So we are part of the, and part of when you're in government too, I'm getting a lot of that feedback locally from you and from others, and I'm bringing that back to the ministers to try and make sure that we adjust our programs. So every day we have caucus calls with ministers in Ottawa to make sure that we implement some of the programs to, keep people safe, but also the issue of income security is a big issue with people losing their jobs and people that are vulnerable, because we've seen this from the COVID seniors and people with disabilities. The most vulnerable in our society is hurting, and we have to find ways to support them better, and that's why CARP is a good example of supporting members. United Way has helped out organizations and seniors. I've been active with United Way, with Mary Lou, to make sure that we get monies to local food banks and transportation, to make sure that and there's been over close to $150,000 in the area being spent by United Way to help local organizations. So we're trying to do what we can federally, but it's been challenging. But I love my job and I love helping people. But I'm concerned about my mother that lives in an apartment close to a nursing home, and like all of you, we all have relatives that we have to make sure that we worry about. But in general, people are anxious. People are stressed. People are concerned. And we have to find ways to reach out to these people to provide them with the support they need. And that's supporting your neighbors is really important.
And I think one of the areas that is federal involvement is housing.
Mm-hmm.
And we know housing,
Yes.
it's not only for senior housing, but for homeless as well too. We've seen certain countries in the world are much more active in providing housing for homeless because it seems to bring them out of that area. And I know that going back in time, there's been cooperative housing units. The federal government's been very much involved, along with the province and municipalities. And there seems to be a lot of talk. Is there any movement in that area at all, looking at affordable housing?
Mm-hmm. So part of the motion in 2017 to develop a national senior strategy, what we also looked at is incorporating a seniors lens on the housing strategy. In 2018, we now have a 10-year housing strategy to work with the provinces. We're in year 2 of this program. So essentially, when we look at what we're working right now is with municipalities, with local organizations, to develop some of the housing models that are appropriate for each area. The country is huge, and it's the first time in, I think, was 35 years that the federal government is back now in housing. So I think it's really important. So we're in year 2. We're working closely with CMHC, and I can't divulge, but we're getting close to quite a few housing units that should be approved by this fall in the greater Sudbury area. So that's something that we got to work with the private sector to build some of these housing that are affordable for seniors and, as you mentioned, families and younger families. But my lens has been trying to make sure that we have a availability for a seniors population, which is much needed. And there are quite a few groups that are working right now with CMHC, and I'm hoping to have some announcements very shortly on the housing front.
Yeah, well, Hugh has arranged a number of sessions. We've talked about housing, especially for seniors, over the years, and we've developed a few plans. Something we're concerned about is the developers come along and they don't ask the seniors. And so we end up with 4-story walk-ups, which are really not terribly friendly to seniors. So, and we've developed plans that are more grade level, accessible, washroom accessible, wheelchair accessible, and that sort of thing, which have been developed. But one of the concerns I think we have, and I think Hugh, I know you'd agree, that oftentimes those that make the decisions don't come to those that require the service or the needs. And why not ask us, before going ahead? And we hope that can be one of the components.
Well, it's absolutely true. But I mean, we're seeing it right here with Marc Serre. It is being aware of us. It's being aware of our needs. And I'll go back to that again. We're all seniors in training. And if you think that you're not going to be, that's not the direction you want to go. Let's hope we all become seniors and live quality lives. And that includes things that everything from accessibility to retail, to healthcare, to education. And let's not neglect that. That education is a key component of much of this. Even if you are 65 or 75 years old, you shouldn't consider yourself not part of the education process. You can either be educated or be an educator. And that could even just be an advocate for something, like saying, the doors at so-and-so don't have push buttons, or what we've got to do at this street corner is change that we've got to make this a longer walk signal. I mean, it's federal, it's provincial, it's municipal, it's all our lives.
I know, and we get letters, Hugh gets letters, I get letters all the time. We received one just this week from out in Cape Creole, as a matter of fact, a gentleman and a couple actually, who are in their own home. They're very happy to be in their own home, but they're concerned about not just the personal care, which is basically looked after, but other things like looking after the actual facility itself, the property. So is there some way, because we know that keeping people in their own homes is the cheapest way.
Much cheaper.
But they sometimes need some help too, and to make sure that they're not being taken advantage of by those that might be doing work.
Fly by night.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's
that's definitely a big issue of and a concern of many people would be to stay home. And when you're looking at, and that's where the federal government needs to work more closely with the provinces. And when we look at regulations, the building code that was part of the committee in Ottawa to look at the Canada National Building Code to make sure we have the accessibility that you talked about. We built a lot of seniors homes in the 70s, and they're not accessible at all. So I want to assure you that the Disability Act that we put in place last year federally, when we look at CMHC, now that the federal government is involved in housing, that we are forcing, if you want any federal dollars, your place needs to be accessible. So we're working closely with the private sector on this and the CMHC to make sure those criteria are met. More needs to be done, obviously, but this is where we're looking at how can we have more long-term care facilities? How can we have more seniors housing? And that's where just last week, as you've heard, may have heard, we have MPs, federal MPs that wrote a letter to, and I was part of that, but wrote a letter to Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, and our Prime Minister to look at how can we modify the Canada Health Act to include long-term care.
Right.
How can we look at a public inquiry into long-term care? Calling the Army is not a solution.
No.
And now they're looking at extending this till September, having the Army part of this. We got to do better. So we got to look at, we did it for Walkerton, we had 7 deaths. We have a lot more in long-term care. It's unacceptable.
Yeah.
And I'm not criticizing any party. I mean, it's nonpartisan. In Ontario, we've had the three political parties that were in government over the last 20 years. So it's not something that is political in nature, but we need to make sure that the public, not just our seniors, but the public looks at cuts hurt. We need to invest. Canada's a rich country. We have the resources to invest in our seniors. We have resources to invest in our communities with infrastructure and building our economy. And we have to do this in cooperation with the federal government and the provincial. And right now, for example, we're not seeing a lot of provincial premiers knocking on the federal government for national standards on long-term care facilities, for example. None of them are asking for it, which is...
But I think we will. We will, Mark. And you and I have spoken about the potential of a Crown inquiry into what happened and what should be happening in long-term care facilities. And I certainly hope there will be an inquiry and has teeth. And it really holds some of these people from the past to some standards and sets new goals, new standards for the future.
Well, we're almost running out of time here. So Member of Parliament, Mark, any final words before we close off? Oh, just one question. I know that in our call yesterday we had with the Ontario chapter, there was some concern about the vast amount of money that the federal government is spending. And most seniors are fiscally responsible, right? And there is some concern about, someone mentioned we had over 400 municipalities in Ontario that are all probably suffering a decline in revenue, and wondering, is the federal government, can the federal government bail them out, as it were, or should they bail them out, or should everybody be suffering to some degree? I mean, there's some, as I said, seniors are very fiscally, I don't want to use that word conservative, but they're fiscally responsible, and I guess that they're a little worried about what direction things are going. Any final comments on that before we say goodbye?
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm hearing that in my office here, that individuals are concerned about the deficit and the debt. So let's make something very clear. The Canadian economy is, prior to COVID, was very strong.
Yeah.
Our fiscal position was very, very strong. When we look at a deficit of less than 1% of our total revenue from the federal government, that's what we were having prior, and we're investing in roads or bridges, we're investing in people. Those investments that were made prior to COVID, and now today, it's really important to be investing in people. And let's be clear, when we look at the debt itself, the government is not like an individual. It's a longer term.
Yeah.
So it's not that we've already said the money that we're spent about 11% of the GDP right now to help businesses, help individuals, help seniors, help people with disabilities. That is going to be part of the debt. But our economy is strong. We'll be strong after this. So I want to assure people that we are not looking at raising taxes because of this, because of the COVID. That's not part of the plan. And I get the emails coming into my office. People are saying, stop supporting people. And I'm saying, well, listen, I know, some individuals are fiscally responsible, and I understand that we have to be fiscally responsible, but our government debt right now to help people is for the long term. And that's really important.
And what other option was there, Mark? I mean,
well, some other countries have helped out people that make $200,000 a year, and I understand, as a government, we could be, okay, we're not spending any more money and we're not helping people out, but that's not where Canadians are,
No.
So